Great, thank you. All right, well, maybe in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Olivia Guest, who is an assistant professor of computational cognitive science in the Department of Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence in the Donder Center for Cognition and the School of Artificial Intelligence at Radboud University. I am astonished at the number of contributions Olivia makes in several, in some ways, distinct areas, but I think pretty connected, including meta theory, both in terms of theory in general and computational approaches in cognitive science. Really working with her colleagues to advocate for taking much more formal approaches to things that we sort of learn implicitly sometimes as scientists and don't really think about as we're practicing. In addition, Olivia is very well known as someone who advocates for critical analysis of AI in particular. Yes, and is also a very strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm really delighted that she's able to join us today. So join me in welcoming Olivia.
Well, thank you so much. So I'll get started then. I hope sound-wise and everything we're good.
Good.
Yeah,
It's good. Yes.
Great. Thanks for the really nice introduction. So what I would like to talk to you all about today is what I call the metatheoretical calculus of connectionism. And yeah, hopefully as we go through these slides, it will become clear what I mean with respect to these different terms. Another way of thinking about what I'm going to say is that I'm going to talk about how we reason over artificial neural networks. And just to get a high-level picture of what I'm going to go over, I would like to give an overview of the main sort of themes. So one is thinking about theories. So in a zoomed out way, when we think about theories, we can ask questions like I put in the title of this paper, like what makes a good theory? How can we make theories good? And things like that. So this kind of like very zoomed out way about our scientific thinking. And I will also talk a little bit less zoomed out about theories, where I'm going to say some things with respect to classical and modern connectionism, which are concepts that I'm going to go through metatheoretically. So thinking about theories in connectionism, which is framework in cognitive science that uses artificial neural networks and such concepts to model and understand cognition. And just a little bit about me, even though Jim very wonderfully covered this. I work in a Department of Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence, and I teach in a School of Artificial Intelligence at the Donders Institute at Radboud University in the Netherlands. And also a little bit about me with respect to my perspective is that when we talk about theories, or when we meta-theorize about theories, we can have a perspective that is cognitive scientific, and that's the one that I have. And what that means is that you can take from these cognitive scientific fields, or these fields that cognitive science is inspired by or contributes to like philosophy, linguistics, anthropology, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and psychology. And you can use these to understand both theories of cognition, theories for understanding cognition, but also the theories that might exist in these sort of constituent fields. And if you're interested in this in a kind of, if you're interested in this in a kind of general sense, please check out my website, because what I'm going to talk about now is just one sort of slice with respect to connectionism. Okay. So, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit zoomed out, or very zoomed out maybe, first, with respect to what kinds of metatheoretical considerations we may want to have as scientists, or what I think should be important metatheoretical considerations. So one way of thinking about how we think about theories is what I call a metatheoretical calculus, so a formal or a semi-formal attempt at describing how we adjudicate over theories. What this means is that we can have clear descriptions or clear formalisms for how we do that in order to introspect and discuss how we do that with each other. Because obviously we do that. Everyone has like whatever, an opinion about a theory, but maybe making this explicit is useful. And we can also have positive and negative characteristics of theories made explicit in this frame too. So things like virtues and vices, so things that we want our theories to have and things that we want our theories not to have. And an important thing that I would like to stress is that we can actually evaluate theoretical accounts non-empirically. So there can be, in principle, objections to theories that have nothing to do with data sets, for example, or experiments. That's not to say that experiments or data sets don't have something to contribute. Of course they do. But what I want to emphasize is non-empirical evaluations or adjudications or virtues or vices are just as important, if not sometimes more so. Okay. And just to sort of be on the same page, one understanding of what a theory is in our context is a scientific proposition described by a collection of natural language sentences, mathematics, logic, figures, that introduces causal relations with the aim of describing, explaining, or predicting a set of phenomena. So just, I'm only saying this, if other people have their own favorite definitions or ways of understanding what a theory is, feel free to use that as well. But I think sometimes it's useful to be really clear about how I see it. And another relevant property of theories, if we think of them as these small, these minuscule thetas, the small black font theta, they can relate to each other in a set theoretical way, and they can be the set that they belong to can be described also as a theory or a family of theories. And they can also relate to phenomena. So for example, here, theta A to C relate to these two phenomena, while maybe these other theories here only relate to one of the two phenomena. So it's sometimes important to be explicit about how we think about theories, how they relate to each other, how they relate to phenomena, and so on. And I think one way of doing it is to think, okay, maybe a journal article could constitute one instance of a theory, and then other journal articles, we can use our judgment, relate to it, either being in the same family or related families, and so on. And also importantly, they can relate to each other through time. So for example, this theta z could be seen as like ancestral to some other theories, and we can structure and organize how we think about theories this way in terms of explicating how they relate to both each other, but also phenomena. Okay, another important aspect, as I mentioned, we want to think of positives and negatives of theories, is to think of these properties of theories as belonging to different, not necessarily non-overlapping, so of course overlapping categories. And what I mean by this is that one aspect of a theory could be its metaphysical commitment, which the need to highlight what parts of theory are not under investigation, but are assumed, asserted, or essential. That thinking about this can help us answer questions like, for example, what is the theory? What causal relationships does the theory propose? What does the theory assert? In which fields is it embedded? That's a really interesting one for cognitive science, where quite often there isn't one specific field, like theories could straddle the boundary between neuroscience, psychology, artificial intelligence, and so on. And what counts as like proper use, inappropriate use, and so on. One way of thinking about this is the constitution of the theory, the identity of the theory, its persistence, maybe through time, its embedding, like what field is it in, like I said, its reach, like maybe which phenomena it relates to or successfully explains or wants to or intends to explain, and yeah, misuse or use. Okay. Another one of these categories where we can think of like different pros and cons is the discursive survival, which is the ability to be understood by interested non-bad actors, so people who really do want to understand the theory, withstand scrutiny within the subfields that it exists in, and also negotiate the dialectical landscape of these different subfields, because of course, yeah, we all know that subfields are called subfields because clearly there's like something that differentiates them from each other, which could be things like what phenomena they're interested in or how they're interested in phenomena and so on. And the kinds of questions that we can answer under this perspective is that things like, is the theory accessible? Are members of the theory's community able to explain the theory? That's quite often a problem if you feel that you don't understand what people are saying, even though they claim to offer a theoretical account. Are the concepts transparent? Are labels used consistently? Can relevant outsiders understand the theory, and so on? Okay, another one is the empirical interface. So the potential to explicate the relationship between theory and observation, how observations relate to and affect theory and vice versa. So here we can say things like what formalisms are appropriate, what methodologies does the theory use to support itself, what type of evidence does the theory require? And answering these kinds of questions can be very enlightening if we haven't sat down and thought, okay, does this data set, for example, actually relate to the theory? And so important angles here are formalization and methodology. It could be the case, of course, that the theory offers no constraints on with respect to these as well. Another aspect is minimizing harm. So reckoning with how theory is forged in a fire of historical, if not ongoing, abuses, past crimes against humanity, current exploitation, and also these things can be turbocharged by machine learning, as well as historical, but also present and internal academic marginalization. On this point, we can ask questions like, does the theory contain great man theorizing, which is when theories or communities of theorists ascribe credit only to certain people or only to certain groups of people? Is the theory exclusionary to certain people or ideas? What is its relationship to previous theories? Does the genealogy of the theory contain harmful ideas? That's quite a common one with respect to the history of statistics and eugenics, for example, where people need to negotiate this troubled history, even if we still want to use statistics, for example. Do ancestral theories remain relevant to the present? What harms have resulted or could result from the use of the theory? I mean, this is also discussed, of course, in ethical review boards and other situations, but maybe in those cases, the focus is more on the experiment itself as opposed to the theory housing of the experiment, if that makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to do the thing that I promised, which is talk specifically about connectionism. And even more specifically, some important historical points, and also my proposal for a current bisection wherein there's two coexisting, but maybe one is more prominent in the present, types of connectionism. Okay, so with respect to the historical details, this is a book by Margaret Bowden and a quote from the book where she says, "Connectionism was conceived almost 3 centuries ago in the 1740s, but had a long gestation. In its embryonic form, it was merely biologized introspection. David Hartley's view that thinking is grounded in associative mechanisms in the brain." Even if people might be uncomfortable for whatever reason, even though I'm not, with saying that it started in the 1740s, as I'm about to show you, and maybe as many of you know, connectionism actually is much older than at least the past 15 years of hype, and certainly has been through numerous summers and winters, essentially failures and successes in the scientific and public eye. Also, with respect to the historical context, our field, so especially, I would say, linguistics, psychology, artificial intelligence, and philosophy, but also in the present neuroscience as well, have incredibly intertwined relationships with connectionism. So here's an example of a newspaper cutting that says, "New Navy device learns by doing. Psychologist shows embryo of computer designed to read and grow wiser. The Navy revealed the embryo of an electronic computer today that it expects will be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence." We're not in class, but if I was in class, sometimes I ask the students to guess when this was written. And this was written in the New York Times in 1958. And I think what's impressive about it as a historical example is that it really could just be in 2026. And this research also looks similar outside of press releases, outside of the mainstream media. It looks very similar in the writings of the actual researchers themselves, like a figure like this, or these two figures, where they have a model of, or a schematic at the top, of how they think the organization of a biological brain is. And on the bottom, the organization of the perceptron, which is a type of neural network. This doesn't look out of place either in a journal article or research output in the present. And yeah, neither do the things they say. So here you have the same article. It says the design of an intelligent automaton, introducing the perceptron, a machine which senses, recognizes, remembers, and responds like the human mind. So Frank Rosenblatt, I think, also wouldn't be out of place with respect to the things that he himself published. Okay. So as I promised, we're going to come back to this century, and we're going to talk about this kind of bisection or splitting in two that I think is or has happened with respect to how connectionist models or connectionist researchers present themselves. So before 2010 is sort of what I call classical connectionism. And that's not to say it doesn't exist anymore. It's just that after 2010, there's a different type as well called M-connectionism or modern connectionism. And I will explain what I mean by this and everything. But essentially, it's important to remember that, of course, both use artificial neural networks as models. But after 2010, the way that these are discussed changes because the models themselves are incredibly large. But also the rationalization is that as a result of successes, again, after 2010, some fundamental change has occurred to explain the successes and so on. I'm not saying this is what I think, I'm saying this is what is described in the literature, and others also perceive some kind of change roughly after 2010. Often highlighting these three papers that I have on the slide. Okay. What I think, and that's not to say I disagree that some changes happen, it's just that I want to highlight how I see the changes. So what I think is that classical connectionism and modern connectionism also differ on how they present themselves to us metatheoretically in the fields that I'm most interested in. So not just engineering or hardware or software successes, but scientific aspects as well. So with respect to the goal, and I do mean the scientific goal, connectionism has the goal of understanding the repercussions of our theories. Models are tools for exploring the implications of ideas. They're used to understand the theories within connectionism, which themselves are about understanding brain cognition and behavior. And a good fit, a good statistical fit, never means that a model can be declared to provide the true explanation for the observed data. Just to be clear, I don't think this is unique to connectionism. It's just that this is how people describe connectionism. I think this could also be how people describe computational modeling in general. And the change, the dramatic shift away from this happens in the other column. So in M-connectionism, modern connectionism, the goal is to predict what systems are going to do. Artificial neural networks get us closer to that goal in neuroscience, okay? When we say we understood a phenomenon, first and foremost, it means that we can predict all of the explainable variance in the data for any input in the domain over which the model is claimed to hold. Okay, I think that's a huge difference, but we will come back to it. Also, with respect to scientific question, Can connectionist principles, this is classical connectionism, give rise to similar behavior and brain data or cognitive capacities as seen in humans? No specific prediction requirements are imposed on the models, and anatomical mappings, if present, are baked in. The model is forwarded as a way to explore theory. On the other hand, can artificial neural networks predict, here used to mean correlate with, we saw it on the previous slide as well, behavior and brain data? They used light inferential statistics, but framed like theoretical models. That's already a problem because these don't have overlapping roles. Not only did we get good predictions, but there's also a kind of anatomical consistency. Theory. So what do they have to say with respect to theory? Theory is implemented by the model. The model is not a stand-in for theory. We consider a simple computational implementation of the theory, in which visual representations of objects and perceptual representations of verbal statements, this is just an example of how they speak. So you see they say implementation of the theory about these objects interact with one another by means of an intermediating semantic system. Whereas theory is the model. Theory is instantiated in task-performing computational models. Theorizing is inspired by engineered systems, not nature directly. Current computational neuroscience practice looks to artificial intelligence, which has historically provided a fund of ideas for biological theories. Mechanism is also an important differentiator. So mechanisms are proposed, which the model embodies, and experiments are done to show proof of concept. Can connections principles give rise to phenomena and/or capacities of interest? So you're using the model, just like I've already said, to explore your theories. And in fact, that's the classical role that models play. They're meant to mediate from theory to data and back. The artificial neural network allows us not just to probe the response to a given test stimulus, but to also ask questions about the nature of the existing representations the model has learned. And I'm glad that's 2020 because it shows that C-connectionism isn't dead. Or, I mean, maybe it is because it's 2026 now. The model is assumed to be equivalent in some way to a cognitive or neural system, and experiments are done to support this assumption. This is the other way around in modern connectionism, or at least not the same way around. The core idea is to treat an artificial neural network as a participant in a psychology experiment in order to tease out the system's mechanisms of decision-making, reasoning, cognitive biases, and other important psychological traits. So you'll notice, like a participant, the model is being used as a participant, not to explore theories, or at least the framing here is very different. Okay, what do they have to say with respect to the brain? This is also a differentiating angle. Brain regions, if related to models, are presented as being modeled, not as uncovered correlationally. Theory or some knowledge comes first, and these ideas are placed into the model purposefully. Whereas computational models can help infer the function of brain regions by linking model and brain activity. It's interesting that the model links itself and not that the theory is mediated by the model to connect with the data. So here it's interesting that theory isn't even in this, but that's another aspect that I mentioned before. Multi-layer models are particularly promising in this regard because their layers can be systematically mapped to brain regions. So it's correlational linking. Okay. Also training, or so-called training, where you adapt the weights, the internal weights of the model. There's often in classical connectionism explicit awareness of the possibility for a behaviorist or associationist stance. Remember also what Margaret Bowden said, And the load placed on the training regime and set, which in the case of artificial neural networks is statistics in the input, don't pre-wire structure into your mechanism if it can get it for free from the environment. Whereas in modern connectionism, claims about statistics in the inputs are downplayed. The model steps or architecture generally is taken as the important factor. The training set, so that's the data used to adjust the weights, is not implicated in argumentation except to say it comprises realistic stimuli, for example, digital photographs. Okay, so much for making these contrasts. Now I'm going to talk about how we reason, or the differences between how we reason. So like I promised, the metatheoretical calculus. Okay. So before we get there, I just want to tease out some more differences just to make it even more clear what I mean. So one aspect is the identity of the two types of connectionism. So what characterizes classical connectionism? Here's an example. Connectionism has demonstrated that a great deal of information is latent in the environment and can be extracted using simple but powerful learning rules. And increasing complexity creates a tension with the primary goals of modeling, simplification and understanding. I feel like this one should make our ears ring a little bit. Okay, and what about modern connectionism on the same point? Remember, it's about deep models which correlate with human data. So something in the model or at the output is correlated, and the model is the theory as such. And it implicates brain areas and neuroscientific sort of data sets and points and constructs are brought up. Okay. What about what differentiates them? Like I already said, like connectionism is pretty standard computational modeling. If we believe, so this is the one of the ways that they think, if we believe that the model can do P, where P is learn and input-output mapping, then we create the model to check P. This is pretty standard. Other computational modeling strategies follow this kind of reasoning too. Whereas modern connectionism, if the model appears to perform tasks at a human level, then the model has human capacities. If you're interested in this angle, also look at the paper at the bottom from 2023 on logical inference over brains, behavior, and artificial neural networks. And if this is making you think, oh, this looks like a weird way of thinking, we will come back to it. Okay, and also the discursive survival. I can't go into this too much in the interests of sort of time, but this has come up many times before. So the survival of connectionism as a whole. So look at this quote from 89. We attend today an explosive infatuation for this once old style, but now new fashioned view of cognition. 1991. Only very recently has connectionism resurfaced in artificial intelligence, and according to some, only connectionist theories can explain the mind. So at least we're told. 88, there are a lot of people out there who are deeply annoyed by the outlandish claims being made in some quarters about the accomplishments and power of connectionism. So with respect to surviving, I'll just say this like as a general point. We can also come back to this, of course, if people are really interested on this, but clearly like these are quite significant attacks. And they're from the last artificial intelligence / artificial neural network summer or hype cycle. And there've been many before, just to be clear. Remember the quote from the late 1950s too. So there've been many like ups and downs, but here's like a, an example where these are quite direct attacks. And of course, you may have to read the whole journal article that I'm referencing, but the point is, yeah, it's survived. Okay, and with respect to the reasoning, I want to obviously come back to this because it's what I'm most interested in. Classical connectionism has this general schema. So you look, this is you looking at a system under study. These are the representations of the systems under study, and you see like different phenomena. You see, I don't know, people performing navigation, say the cognitive capacity of navigation or the cognitive capacity of categorization and so on. You see these different phenomena relating to these capacities. So that's the seeing part is the phenomena. And what you do is you postulate a mechanism or a function for the system under study S, and then you go off and you build a model M that you also look at. But when you look at it, you recognize, and this is really important, even though like basically almost everyone who does computational modeling on some level is aware of this, you don't think that the things that you see in the model are examples of the phenomenon under study. You recognize that they are models. They are meant to provide mediation from theory to data and back and enhance your understanding. You're not typically a formal realist, for example, or a makist, as Iris van Rooij would say, who would think that you have created something in this class. You haven't created like another human, you haven't created another cognition. This is the typical classical connection stance. And it can be formalized even further. So what we can say is if we observe P prime in a cognitive system, so that's that, and we believe P prime can be related to a process P in our model, that squiggle above. And just to be clear, this is modal doxastic logic, but I'm going through it, so hopefully it's not too tricky to understand. And we believe that our model can give rise to this process. Then we do it, then we make it, then we do the modeling. Okay, so this is pretty standard. It's not just connectionism, it's pretty standard, normal stuff. Okay, what about in modern connectionism? Well, what I think happens is very similar stuff at the top. So we look at the world and we're like, oh, some interesting phenomena that relate to my field. And then what happens is that we correlate the system under study, so data extracted from the system under study with our model, and we map that question from the system under study to the model. And we also talk about phenomena in the model as actually being in some important way of the same kind. And we saw this in the late 50s too. So it's not just, I want to clarify, it's not just modern connectionists that do it, but it's an important part of how they do it. Remember, Rosenblatt, the machine thinks, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and the same treatment, if we observe P prime in a cognitive system, and we believe P prime is the same as our process P in our model, this is very different. It's not a squiggle anymore. It's an identity relationship. This is important to remember because this is how I propose we diagnose the different types of connectionism, or one of the ways. So this here is different. And we observe our model can give rise to the process. Then we believe our model indeed performs the process. This is very different. Okay. So far, so different. Hopefully that's clear, but feel free to ask me questions in a bit. What about the empirical interface? So how does classical connectionism relate? So, for example, when it comes to evaluating the scientific properties of our model, the kinds of methods that we use are, or the kinds of methods that exist in the literature are things like typical inferential statistics as used when analyzing the data for the system under study. This is not surprising, of course. The model is just an implementation of a theory. It's not imbued with extra properties, such as being an instance of the phenomenon under study or of a cognitive capacity. So that's just underlining what I already said in that extract. On the other hand, modern connectionism, what will typically happen is they'll take some model off the shelf. So the computational mechanism, even if they have different conditions or different setups, is always the same because it's some model off the shelf. So they miss out on the chance to pick out causal structures via modeling. And the claims are based not on properties woven into the model's design because it was off the shelf, but correlations over data extracted from the system under study and the model. Okay. So I want to wrap up. In conclusion, with respect to meta theory, I want to underline that connectionism, and this is a quote, might lead to a different form of cognitive theory, away from seeing the human mind as rule governed, because certain phenomena can be neatly and economically dealt with by connectionist theories. And this is Michael Thomas in 1998. During this transitionary period, wherein so-called symbolic cognitive scientists thought about how rules might govern cognition, we see that connectionists, in contrast, may have avoided stopping to think a different form of theory, which is the way that it was described above, might be no theory at all. Okay, so what does the metatheoretical calculus, or in general, just thinking really deeply about all of this, do? What does it help us do? So one thing it helps us to do is to understand what role models play in our science. For example, we can realize that just because a model correlates with neural and behavioral data, it's not sufficient for us to infer that the model is performing cognition. Correlation does not imply cognition. And that's an important contrast to what was said previously with respect to how modern connectionism does things. Relatedly, we can notice the anything goes dictum of industry. So when industry comes into play, whether it's because we use their models or take their money or whatever, they don't really have the same principles or the same goals or intentions as scientific investigation. Maybe they're only interested in their model being successful with correlating with human data. We can also be aware of what follows from our reasoning. So if we assume that machines can think, we may end up creating a logical circle, as opposed to if we are more careful with our assumptions and how we treat them. And relatedly, we can avoid self-undermining by looping through AI summers and winters, because exaggerated claims about the capacities or the usefulness or the roles of models what inevitably causes the kind of ideological crash like we see when connectionism goes in and out of fashion. So indeed, in fact, in my opinion, if people really like connectionism, they should be extra cautious with how they talk about their apparent modeling successes. Okay. And yeah, on that note, thank you very much. And I would love to take your questions.
Thank you, Olivia.